Check, check. Make sure we're working here. Hopefully. Check, check. Want to make sure that you guys can hear me. I'm not sure if you can. Check, check. Want to make sure that you guys can hear me. I'm not sure if you can. All right. I was able to verify that, and thank you, Janine, for that confirmation. So I'm not sure how well this video will go. It seems a little choppy on my end, and maybe that's just because of the fact that I'm trying to stream and verify at the same time. Hard to say. But nevertheless, I want to welcome everyone who has joined Freedom Friday, the new Freedom Friday, although it seems ever so familiar. And today we are going to be discussing the duty of firefighters and how much of a privilege and honor it is to have each and every one of them. Much like policemen and much like military soldiers and whatnot, firefighters do something absolutely extraordinary. They get up every day, and as they leave their homes, they have come to the conclusion, perhaps it's subconscious, perhaps it's literally on the forefront of their mind, but nevertheless, each time they leave their home and pursue their way to their job and clock in for the day, or however it is that they start their day, they know that each one of those times they are putting themselves on the line and know the risk that they may not go home that day. It's a very brave and an admirable thing to do. And if I dare say so, they are far better people than I am. I want to open up a document that I was kind of preparing a little bit, and it's got a few stories on it. And then, of course, I want to close out with one final story, which I found ever the more touching. It really brings out, or it really not necessarily brings out, but it really displays the character and the devotion. And a separate side. I mean, it doesn't take away from the people that are our fellow firefighters, but they bring out a different aspect than I think perhaps we see on a daily basis. So I want to see if I can find this document here. And I know where I saved it. I also want to mention that as a side note, and it very much is a side note, that the purpose of after these live streams, as I have time, which during the holiday season especially I have very little of, but my goal is to download these live streams and cut out some of the dead air time, or the stutters, the hums and ahs, and it's basically shave down some of the lesser necessary aspects of the live stream. That way, you get the diamond in the rough, if you will. And I kind of did that already with the very first live stream that we did, and that was over, well, it was a month and a half ago now. And so instead of an hour and 4 live stream, I was able to cut it down to just over 45 minutes, I believe. So that's just a little side note there of my intentions this far. And I'll probably do the same thing with the Salvation Saturday thing at some point in time. And of course, the document that I saved is now just a bunch of chicken scratch. Naturally, that would happen because I'm just that fortunate. So I'm gonna have to pull up the website that I got these stories from, and I want to try something slightly different than usual. I'm going to read these stories. They're short stories. And I want to give credit to the media for even publishing these stories in the first place. It's very admirable of them to do. And but I want to do something slightly more. And I want to add a little bit, I want to do an ad lib, if you will, of putting things into perspective, perhaps. Maybe I'll do a reasonable job. Maybe instead, fireman Mike Giroux chose to rappel down the face of the building 14 floors, suspended by a single line to rescue the 2 men and bring them to the ground safely. One slip could have dislodged more scaffolding, crushing all 3 in a grisling death. Luckily, he didn't slip. Now that's the end of the story, and like I said, it's a brief one. It's short. But let's look at this from in perspective. Imagine being in the construction field. Say my guess, and I don't know because I didn't do the background research. I've been busy working on the Salvation Saturday paper, which, by the way, if you're watching this now or watching this later, the Saturday or the Salvation Saturday, it's going to be very informational. It's going to have a lot of meat to chew on. So I just recommend that you prepare yourself for, maybe even taking notes. Who knows? I know that I've done my fair share already, and I still have some more to do. And it looks like the Salvation Saturday's question of is Jesus of Nazareth the Messiah is going to take probably at least 3 sessions. So be prepared. The introductory alone so far I think is over 30 minutes just to read that I've written down so far. So nevertheless, I'm in the construction industry, so I'm going to make an educated guess that these construction workers were doing some remodeling in the senior center. It's obviously an existing senior center, not one that is completely under construction and being built brand new from the ground up. But nevertheless, my guess is that there was outside. There was no wall to separate the outside from within. In other words, a completely open area. And it's either that or they were doing some external maintenance. It could be even so much as re-shingling, or not re-shingling, but adding different siding. Who knows? I don't know the details on it. But nevertheless, they were roped, if you will. They were scaffolded. In other words, they were roped to keep them in place while they do their work. And it gave way for both construction workers, unfortunately. In fact, I believe it could have even been as simple, or even could have been a platform that they were on, much like window washers use. There's different forms, but nevertheless, it gave way, and they had no way of getting down to safety by themselves. and the ladder that the firemen used was 10 feet too short. This is a big deal. So Mike Giroux, the firefighter, had to, well, let me pause for just a moment, actually. Is the internet still lagging on my end? I mean, it very well could be. It says, well, it doesn't give me a clue, really, on how well it's doing. So please let me know. I know there's probably at least a 30, if not a 45-second. Okay, it's doing better now. Good. So the ladder of this that they were using, I'm guessing it was the ladder that's directly attached to the fire truck, because that's the longest kind of ladder that I think you can get. Otherwise, I think typically the longest ladder you can get, I think, is even 80 feet, which, by the way, for a 13-story, being 13 stories up, we're talking upwards of 200 feet, if not more, up in the air, which is fatal if the two construction workers were to fall. Now, Mike Giroux did something brave, to say the least, and he attached a rope to himself. I'm assuming to a harness as well. What he tied this rope to, I don't know. It could have been any number of things. Probably some sort of sturdy ventilation, but who knows. Keeping in mind that he's not just above them. He's 27 stories up at the top of the building. We're talking probably at least 400 feet up from the ground. I want to first imagine from Mike Giroux's eyes, this brave firefighter, being forced to look down to be able to get his footing to the side of the building in order to slowly work his way down the building. I can only imagine what his thoughts might have been, knowing full well that one wrong move, just one, may have caused him a fatal end as well. And having to go down at least 200 feet, probably, down 14 stories, from the side of a building, slowly easing his way down on a single rope in order to save the lives of these two construction workers. Now imagine that's a physical task in itself, just to be able to rope yourself down. Whether he had, I'm sure he had some incredible high-end climbing gear. It is state funded, or using state funding, they can afford those kinds of things. But nevertheless, we're dealing with having to push your weight off of the side of the building, which is putting immense stress on the legs, while also fighting gravity with not only his legs but also with his probably not his bare hands, but with the strength of his hands, and having to do that, releasing the tension of the clamp which holds the rope tight each time that he pushes himself off the side of the building, squeezing that clamp to release it, and also controlling the ratio of speed on how far down he went and how fast he went each time that he pushes off. And then on top of that, after successfully reaching the two construction workers who bravely awaited, and patiently no less, probably wondering how if they're going to make it at all, fear does amazing things. The adrenaline that was going through all three of them must have been absolutely incredible. Now imagine as if it wasn't strenuous enough for Mike Giroux to have to go down the side of this building, probably 200 feet if not more, but also taking on the weight of 2 other grown men, probably at least 420 pounds, because I'm sure they had their gear too. Not only Mike's life was on the line at this point, on this single rope, just one, but then 2 other men as well, and being able to do it successfully. I can only imagine an extra 420 pounds as you have to push yourself off with your bare strength, having to still grip that, squeeze that grip to release it from the rope so you can slowly descend down, and still with one other hand being able to control how fast you descend and what the distance. Mike, you are a better man than me. What you did was absolutely incredible. I cannot even fathom the challenge that must have been, and yet you were willing to do it without hesitation. Without you, those construction workers clearly and evidently would not have been able to make it. Not without a helicopter, anyway. My prayers to you, brother. So let's go ahead and go back to the live chat. And for those who are just joining us, I want to say hello to all of you, and that includes Nana and the Greater Bilby, and I think somewhere along the lines there was someone else who also said something. Maybe I can't tell, but yeah, all 3 brave men. And let's see here. Sorry, I also want to mention that I'm going to have to do something about this computer. I don't know what happened, but it is no longer functioning the way that it used to. I might have to pull out my Surface. I don't like working with it, but it performs far better, and I imagine that it can probably do a world of improvement to these live streams. But I'm just going to go ahead and gimp along. The next story is about Robert Diaz. Now, I did not familiarize myself quite as much with this story in particular. And I also apologize for being late on this. That's the whole reason why the live stream started late. And apparently the live stream, the live dashboard on this account versus my Houseless on Wheels account is different. And so I'm going to have to work through all those things. I didn't prepare myself in that respect. But then again, I had to work a little late working on a Christmas gift for a friend. Anyway, so Robert Diaz. The thing about fire rescues is that the people can be just as dangerous as the fires. Human beings tend to lose their capacity for rational thought when faced by a blazing inferno. For New York firefighter Robert Diaz, he needed to follow all his instincts to save a child from a horrific apartment fire. When Diaz entered the burning apartment, there was no sign of anybody. His keen eyes, however, spotted a medical oxygen line trailing into a closet. Following it, he uncovered an 11-year-old boy underneath a pile of blankets. Diaz grabbed the unconscious boy and discovered that the way out was totally engulfed in flames. Charging through the blaze, protecting the child, Diaz found himself tangling in telephone and cable wires, but still managed to escape with his life. Again, another very brief, very short story. And I want to thank craveonline.com, which is where I'm getting these stories from today, for being even willing to commemorate these firefighters. Because, media does not have to do these things. The fact that media was even willing to do so was very admirable. So, but let's put this into perspective as well. Like I said, I'm going to kind of ad-lib these things a little bit. Maybe I'll do them justice. Maybe I will ruin the story even more. I will leave that to your better judgment. This, I'm not sure how Mr. Diaz was aware of a child in this apartment fire, but I imagine that the parents probably made mention of it. It's kind of hard to say. I don't know the background of information of all of this, but nevertheless, it takes a vast amount of experience to be able to pick up on something so minute as an oxygen, an oxygen line. The fact that the boy even had one was pretty incredible. What I don't know is whether it was because of health issues that he had it. Perhaps it's perhaps this boy has some sort of excuse me just a second. All right. Perhaps the boy actually had asthma, which is common for needing additional oxygen. The fact that the boy was able to even hold on to this oxygen mask or oxygen line and then cover himself in blankets in order to protect him not only from the smoke, because the blankets will filter out some of the smoke, but also from the heat. You would almost think that blankets would cause more heat to build for the person, but it can actually reflect or at least damper some of the heat for a small period of time. Now, how long the boy was in this closet is kind of hard to say, but I want to put these. But it sounds like the boy was very rational in light of things going on, knowing full well that his life may come to an end soon, and yet he still seemed to be rational enough to be able to make these smart decisions. Now, Robert Diaz. I want to put things into perspective. This young man, I mean, I'm looking at his picture. I wish I could put it on display. I could, but anyway, there's too much other stuff in here. But it looks like he was a young man. I could be wrong, but I think he is. He looks pretty young. He looks about my age, probably late 20s, early 30s. And yet still having the experience to pick up on these little things is absolutely incredible to me. It's just mind-blowing to me. I love to learn about things that people in this regard, pick up on as certain detail. This I imagine that Mr. Diaz did not wake up thinking, I'm going to have to deal with a fire today. I think he woke up. Maybe he does morning meditation. Maybe he does morning prayer. Hard to say. But I'm sure, if anything, he might have been thinking, I hope there's no fire today. And yet he gets called out to an apartment fire, not knowing exactly what to expect yet. He just knows that there's a fire and it needs to be extinguished. And I'm the man for the job. And clearly he was. Now imagine getting on the scene. I'll put this into first person for a second. Imagine getting onto the scene of this fire. And as soon as you get out of the truck, the fire truck, you're approached by two very fear-filled parents. My guess is that they're still rather young, probably around his age actually. Probably, mid-30s. Maybe early 30s, completely panicked, in panic, and probably knowing full well that they may lose a child that night, could probably barely speak, let alone breathe, because of all that fear. And trying to express that their child is still in that building, still where the flames are currently engulfed. Engulfing the entire vicinity where he resided. And I can only imagine that Mr. Diaz, without any hesitation, said, okay, I'm going in. Now, as soon as he steps foot, even that first step that he takes toward the building, I bet he's thinking. I don't know for sure, but I bet he's thinking, if this is where my life ends, it will not be a wasted life. But I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that boy gets out safely. And then probably busting down the door, not wasting his time trying to see if the knob is hot on the door. Just kick it down. There's no point in keeping it anyway. It's probably going to be burned up anyway. And assessing the area only to see flames. There's no human life here, currently and evidently visible. I need to see whatever clue I can find, because the parents are very certain and very feared that their child is still here. I wonder where he actually saw this dangling oxygen line. Maybe it was across the hallway. But he was able to follow it into a room, probably also extremely, extremely covered in flames. Probably fought his way through a little bit. It was safe enough to probably find a trail around somewhere, but it was still covered, surrounded by flames. The heat was probably what caused the boy, if not the smoke, then definitely the heat caused him to go unconscious. But he was able to follow that line into this closet. What we don't know is if the closet doors were also on fire. I hope not. But he's able to grab the boy. And upon turning around, his exit point has been covered in flames. Now, I don't know what it would take to safely secure the boy in a way that he's not going to get burned. But obviously, Mr. Diaz knows all too well, overqualified to be able to get this taken care of. Maybe he still used the same blankets. After all, they would protect him for a short period of time. And it's one thing to acknowledge that he fought his way through the flames. But at the same time, it says that he was getting caught in telephone wire and cable wire. You want to know what my best guesstimate is? I bet he couldn't see where he was going. And that's why he got caught. I imagine he had to actually use brute strength to rip the wires out of the walls, which really the walls weren't going to do any good anyway. They were being burnt to ashes anyway. But imagine the dilemma. I'm caught in these cables. I need to get this boy out. I'm not so much concerned about myself, but I need to get this boy out. He's in one arm. I'm stuck here. The adrenaline that it must have taken to actually just completely rip the cables out enough to be able to get himself loose had to be incredible. But despite the challenges, he still got the boy out. Mr. Diaz, you are an incredible man. Maybe one day I can learn to be just like you. In the meantime, I will pray for your safety. And I'm sure the rest of us will join in that as well. Let's go back to the live chat. And I'm going to have to go back on this one because this one has quite a few in here. The Greater Bilby says, yes, I hope he was awarded a Medal of Bravery. I suppose they would never, ever expect such an award. You're probably right. They're probably just thinking, these firefighters are probably just thinking, I'm just doing my job. I'm doing what I signed up for. I don't need I don't need a participation trophy or a reward in order to do my job. And I can learn from something like that. And also, Jen, I appreciate your kind words about the transitioning over the new channels. It's going to take a little bit of a learning curve. I have a feeling. The Greater Bilby also says it's hard to even hear, let alone to have actually gone through such difficult rescue situations. I have no idea, but I've never had to fight. I have never had to rescue someone from a fire, but I can only imagine that the adrenaline would heighten all of your senses. But I don't know. I would have to claim ignorance on that. And let's see. Janine asks, "Was permanently?" We don't. Well, the story doesn't actually talk about that. But from the sound of it, because they didn't mention it, my guess is that he was not. See, Nana says, "So scary for those parents. I can't imagine. Neither can I." Jenny says, "I wouldn't be able to stay out if my child was in a burning house." Well, it's one thing to say it when your house isn't burning down. It's another to actually deal with it when your house is burning down. I'm noticing that as I'm looking through these live chats that there seems to be some glitching going on. I hope it's not on your end. Hopefully it's just on mine. And Janine also brings up a really good point that oxygen is very flammable. And yes, it is very frightening. I didn't even think about that. The oxygen tank, could have exploded. Assuming there is an oxygen tank, which I'm guessing there is. Let's see. The Greater Bilby says, "I guess they're trained to check for all possible scenarios where panicked people might hide. Sherlock Holmes type deductions." Yeah. I would never have guessed that a firefighter would be given detective-like training. But come to think of it, it would only make sense, especially in dire situations like this. The Greater Bilby also says, "My mother-in-law had one and had to be in a special nursing home room because of having it, kind of separate from the rest of the complex." That's interesting. And maybe that has something to do with it. It's kind of hard to say. But yeah, I did lose my connection for a minute. I don't know even how well this is. I mean, it's going to be interesting to actually review this later on because it might cut out completely, and then I might lose that portion of content. But I guess we'll see. It's weird. I feel pretty much 100% better except for this annoying cough, and I'm assuming that it's gonna. I'm fully anticipating that I'm gonna have it for at least another month. It seems to happen that way. Apparently, according to Janine, firefighters get about 6 weeks training, and you'd think, well, that doesn't seem like a very long time, but when you're being paid to to be trained. Hang on. Why is this doing this? Okay. I've disconnected again. It's partially because of where I'm parked. There's not much I can do about that. But I'm assuming that the rest of the story was cut off. Let me read that little bit. So Jason found a woman unconscious on the floor after fighting through with no equipment fighting through a blinding wall of smoke, and proceeded to lift her and carry her down 28 floors to safety, all in a day's work. Off the clock, by the way. So again, I want to put this into perspective as well. Again, I may be doing it justice. I may make it worse than it actually is. Who knows? I'll leave that to you. But imagine you're off the clock. This is your day off. Perhaps you had a previous 24 or 48-hour shift that you had to complete, and then you get yourself a day off. You've earned it, and naturally they earn every bit of time off that they get. The last thing that I bet Jason was expecting to find was a house on fire, or a building on fire, really. And yet, even though he was not getting paid to do this, and this is showing the true heart of our heroes in the firefighter industry. Even off the clock, after putting in whatever shift that he worked the previous day, he was still ready and willing, equipment or no equipment, in this case no equipment, to march into battle, if you will, a battle against the flames. First, he had to go up 28 flights of stairs. If one flight of stairs was at least 30 stairs, that's a lot of stairs. It's like over 1,000 stairs. And I bet he ran up those stairs as quickly as he possibly could. Well, my math might be off on that. I don't think it is, actually. But if it's not over 1,000, it's going to be pretty close to 1,000 stairs. Because I bet in one of these older Chicago buildings, we're talking square up each floor. And he'd have to do that 28 times. Now, probably kicking down the door like the last guy, Mr. Diaz. Not knowing to expect anybody. Probably, I imagine, as he's running up these stairs, his thought is not even about himself. I bet he, more or less, died to self the moment that he came to the conclusion that he was needed. And that it was just about making sure that nobody else was going to be in that fire, hurt, or whatever. So I bet he's thinking as he's running up these stairs, not, oh man, this is exhausting, I'm so tired. Not, man, I hope I don't get a cramp or a Charlie horse while I'm going up these stairs. Not, do I have time to sit for just a minute? I mean, this building has been burning, or this apartment's been burning for probably at least a half an hour. No, I bet he was thinking, I hope nobody's in that room. But if they are, I'm going to get them. I'm going to save them. Or I'm going to die trying. Not even on the clock. Willing to die. So he proceeds, probably rounding through the house, or through the condo or apartment or whatever it was. We don't know those details. And without his equipment, still fighting through this blinding wall of smoke to find a woman curled up unconscious on the floor. Perhaps he did get a Charlie horse or some other cramp. Perhaps he might even have twisted his ankle while he climbed up those stairs. We really don't know. Whether he did or not is also irrelevant, because he was still more than willing. He didn't call for backup. I mean, he did call 911. But he didn't wait for backup to go in. He didn't wait for backup to pick up this woman to take to safety. And I bet on the way down those stairs, he was thinking, I'm glad that I'm glad that I was there when it was needed. I'm glad I was there when I was needed, and thank God that she's all right. Unconscious maybe, but all right. Thinking about Mr. Durbin here. Thinking about the other two stories that we've read, I can't help but think to myself, how can I apply this to my Christian faith? Now, I know that not everybody who reads these stories is going to probably question that, or even be Christian for that matter, but since my Christian faith is the most important aspect of my life, or at least it should be, how can I apply to that? This man, Mr. Durbin, even off the clock, was willing to die to self and do his job. It's a question I think I'm going to meditate about. So in this, actually, before I mention anything about that, let's go ahead and go back to live chat. See, Janine says they have to wear something around 100 pounds on their back too and carry water hose. I'm assuming that's from a different part of the conversation. And the Greater Bilby says, I apologize for typing so much. I always do, even when I tell myself not to. Well, you don't have to apologize. I'm just glad that you're active. Let's see here. Greater Bilby also says, I don't think I'd make it up 28 flights of stairs anymore. I'd need divine intervention to make it. I almost wonder, I mean, I know these firefighters are in incredible shape. They have to be. But I wonder in normal circumstances if this brave man would have been able to go up 28 flights of stairs as quickly as he had to. But in that moment, when adrenaline is on your side and you're not thinking about yourself, I don't think it's relevant. I think whether he would have been able to make up 28 flights of stairs, even if he would not have in normal situations, I bet that was the oomph needed to make it happen. And then having to go down those 28 flights of stairs. And then, let's see. Janine says, it's interesting that you can put this into their perspective. Well, I don't know if I'm doing a good job. I mean, I'll let you think what you will, and I don't even know if I'm being accurate. But I do like to put things in other people's shoes when I read about stories like this. So I'm hoping I did it justice. I guess I'll find out sometime, or maybe I'll never find out. But nevertheless, I'm always absolutely fascinated by our emergency response teams. So, in this holiday season, now I'm probably one of the few, I know I'm not the only Christian, but I'm probably one of few Christians that does not celebrate Christmas. But that doesn't mean I don't still appreciate it for the family values and whatnot that come about it. I had a conversation with my uncle a few weeks ago. He's probably not watching now, but I know he has watched my Freedom Fridays before, and who knows if he'll actually hear this. But he knows I'm talking about him. And he asked me, because he's gone through some rough financial situations. Excuse me. Sorry. I'm going to have to get some to drink pretty soon. But, he's had some rough financial situations, and I really wish I could help him with it. But he's really close to being able to take advantage of his retirement. And he's been very generous in Christmas gifts in the past and whatnot. And so I kind of want to talk about him. I actually kind of like talking about my family to a degree. But he asked me what I wanted for Christmas. Now, one thing that I think is important to put into the picture here is that I actually look up to my uncle to a certain degree. He has been a prime example in my observation throughout this interesting journey we call life. And he used to be a crane operator. He's done various blue-collar jobs. I mean, even just recently, until he I think he had to get, I think he was laid off or he quit out of frustration or something like that. I can't remember the exact details, but he was a truck driver up until recent. And from the sounds of it, he pushed himself far more and worked much harder than his younger employees and than his younger coworkers that were probably roughly half his age. I mean, he's in his 60s. So between that and just his overall work ethic, he holds to certain values that I have always treasured. So when he asked me over the phone the other day what I wanted for Christmas, the only thing I could ever ask from him, is simply to, join in our family Christmas dinner. And he'll never admit it. He'd probably disagree with me for saying this, but he's a great man. Never married, never had kids, but if he did have kids, I can guarantee you that they would have the same incredible work ethic that he does. And I can say the same thing about my own father. He's 60 years old now, and he still works more hours in 4 days than I do in a week and a half. Probably because of the fact that he has such a high up position. He makes, incredible money, at least in comparison to me. But he is, between that and the risks that my parents, both of them, who are still together, praise God, the financial successes that they've had in life, with all the risks that they've taken, and the boundaries that they've set as I was growing up. And I don't really remember too much of them because of a situation that happened when I was 16, and maybe I can talk about that sometime. Deborah Joy wants me to talk about it, but maybe sometime. But they, even my own parents have always raised my brother and myself that a strong work ethic is what's going to get you through life. And I get to see the evidence of that in my own parents. My father, my father could afford to retire anytime he wants. And he's at the point now where, the company he works for is getting bought by another firm or another larger company or whatever. I don't know all the details. I just know that it's getting bought out. And he's at the point where he's like, well, if they don't need me and they want to let me go, then it's not going to hurt my feelings. And I'm thinking to myself, man, maybe one day I can say that. Granted, I'm just over half his age, but to know that sort of success can happen just from hard work and responsibility with your finances is quite inspiring, and always has been. My mother, before she retired, was quite a workaholic as well. But hers was a little bit different. I mean, yeah, she worked full time, but she, anytime that we've had family members in the past, and I've counted, I've had to go through more deaths in the family than I care to count. But in each one of those times, whether it be my dad's mother, whether it be her own parents, or a close relative, or even a distant relative, she was always there to nurse them and take care of them. And she didn't have to. So, one of these days, I'm hoping to have the heart like my mother, the work ethic as my father, and the focus of my uncle. And with that, I want to go back to the live chat. See, Janine said, my parents have impressed a great work ethic on me as well. I have no doubt about that. The Greater Bilby says, sounds like my husband, same work ethic. That's awesome. Nana says, go get some water or something. We will wait for you. I appreciate that. My throat's cleared up a little bit, but yeah. Oh, and Janine says, it's interesting that he was able to diet himself off the clock. We need to be able to diet himself all the time, not just around the other believers. I agree. And that's a whole nother topic of discussion, perhaps for another time on Salvation Saturday. The Greater Billy says, you seem like a good mix of both your parents. I'm hoping. And not necessarily just because of them, but also being redeemed. I'm hoping that's played a big role. I think it has. And Janine says, what a great mom. No wonder you turned out so well. If only you knew. I'm kind of glad you don't. No. And the Greater Bilby brings up a sad but valuable point, and that is that work ethic is very rare now. And I, being of the millennial age range, I unfortunately know very well what you mean, and I will leave it at that. Before closing up this session, this Freedom Friday, I want to read a story. Now, this one is a little bit of an emotion grabber, if you will. And perhaps you've actually read it. I mean, this is back from December 2nd, 2001, if I remember correctly. Now, this shows a side of firefighters that I don't think anybody expects, but everybody can learn from. This one is called The Littlest Firefighter. And most names have been redacted, but there are pictures here that are absolutely phenomenal. It goes something like this. A 26-year-old mother stared down at her son who was dying of leukemia. Although her heart was filled with sadness, she also had a strong feeling of determination. Like any parent, she wanted her son to grow up and fulfill all his dreams. Now that was no longer possible. The leukemia would see to that. But she still wanted her son's dreams to come true. She took her son's hand and asked, Bobsy, did you ever think about what you wanted to be once you grew up? Did you ever dream and wish that what you would do with your life? Mommy, I always wanted to be a fireman when I grew up. Mom smiled back and said, let's see if we can make your wish come true. Let's see. Here the book departs from the actual events just a bit. Bobsy had 3 wishes. Let's see, the other 2 were to ride a hot air balloon and to visit Disneyland. Also, the chicken soup account says that Bobsy's mom called the local fire department in Phoenix, Arizona, where they lived Actually, she called. Well, okay. She called the newly founded Make-A-Wish Foundation. Oh, okay. So this was 1981. So I don't like this version of the story. But anyway, the website that I did find is no longer there, so I had to improvise. And Bopsy became their first customer, apparently. So this is the very first story of Make-A-Wish Foundation. It was the foundation that made the arrangements to grant Bopsy's wishes. The fire department agreed not only to let Bopsy ride around with them for a day, but to supply him with a full uniform, complete with a yellow coat and a helmet, custom made just for him, and designated him the first honorary member of the Phoenix Fire Department. Now, whether Make-A-Wish Foundation had anything to do with it or not is irrelevant because the fire department still had to agree to it. I mean, Make-A-Wish Foundation could have easily just hired a bunch of people and pretended they were firefighters, but that wasn't the case. So good on the Phoenix Fire Department for agreeing to do this. And they assigned a popular member of their department, Fireman Bob Walp, well known for his local TV appearances, and to accompany Bopsy on his day as a firefighter. Fireman Bob picked up Bopsy, dressed him in his firefighter's uniform, and escorted him from his hospital bed to the waiting hook and ladder truck. Bopsy got to help steer the truck back to the fire station. He was in heaven. There were 3 fire calls in Phoenix that day, and Bopsy got to go out on all 3 calls. He rode in the different fire engines, the paramedics' van, and even the fire chief's car. He was also videotaped for the local news program. The Make-A-Wish Foundation account of Bopsy's story adds, Bopsy was made to feel at home at fire station number 1. Along with Walp, Bopsy scrambled around the back of Engine 9's ladder truck and turned on the horn. Following the ride, he dosed a few cars with water from a 75-pound hose. At the end of the day, Bopsy was pinned with an official firefighter's badge. Bopsy also went on to experience his hot air balloon ride and his trip to Disneyland. Well, that's good. Having this dream come true, with all the love and attention that was lavished upon him, so deeply touched Bopsy that he lived 3 months longer than any doctor thought possible. One night, all of his vital signs began to drop dramatically, and the head nurse, who believed in the hospice concept that no one should die alone, began to call the family members to the hospital. Then she remembered the day Bopsy had spent as a fireman, so she called the fire chief and asked if it would be possible to send a fireman in uniform to the hospital to be with Bopsy as he made his transition. And this is where the true character of a firefighter really shows. The chief replied, "We can do better than that. We'll be there in 5 minutes. Will you please do me a favor? When you hear the siren screaming to see the lights flashing, will you once over the PA system that there is not a fire? It's just the fire department coming to see one of its finest members one more time. And will you open the window to his room?" About 5 minutes later, a hook and ladder truck arrived at the hospital and extended its ladder up to Bopsy's 3rd floor open window. 16 firefighters climbed up the ladder into Bopsy's room. With his mother's permission, they hugged him and held him and told him how much they loved him. With his dying breath, Bopsy looked up at the fire chief and said, "Chief, am I really a fireman now?" "Bopsy, you are, and the head chief, Jesus, is holding your hand." The chief said, with those words, Bopsy smiled and said, "I know. He's been holding my hand all day, and the angels have been singing." He closed his eyes one last time. That is true firefighter glory right there. And with that, I want to thank each and every one of you for showing up today. I mean, it's the numbers are way down in comparison to with the House of Some Wheels channel, but that's to be expected for a little while. And nevertheless, I want to thank all of you for being here and for participating. The Greater Bilby says it is hard to get through the Make-A-Wish Foundation, Make-A-Wish stories without crying. Videos are amazing when you see how sick the children really are, what they are able to do during their wishes, outings, visits. And Nana says, thank you so much for this, and you're welcome. And apparently Janine is in tears. Anyway, so again, I want to thank each and every one of you. I've obviously got other things that I will now need to attend to, but all of you mean a great deal to me, and if I imagine I'll be able to do another Freedom Friday, but just in case I'm not able to, I want to wish each and every one of you Merry Christmas. And with that, thank you for watching. Take care. Love others as you love yourself. And I'll hopefully see you tomorrow for Salvation Saturday, still on this same channel. And again, be prepared. There's going to be a lot of information that I'm going to be spouting out with my noise box. So if you feel like taking notes, you can. I'm hoping to have my notes readily available sometime soon after the live stream, so that way you can look up references and all that kind of fun stuff. So anyway, I put a lot of time and effort into tomorrow's live session, and I think it'll be quite evident. So look forward to that, and I will hopefully see you tomorrow. Take care.